Hi everyone. So welcome to the new lecture for the UGC NET Economics preparation by Economics Harbour. In this lecture, we'll be discussing the theories of demand, and under this specifically, we'll be talking about Cardinal or Marshallian analysis. So it must be noted that the Cardinal school is the oldest school in case of theories of demand. So according to this school, the demand for a commodity is a function of the utility which is derived from the same commodity. Right. So the question is, what is utility? Right. So utility is the power, please note, the power of a commodity to satisfy human wants. So three keywords here, right? Your power, satisfy, and human wants. So utility is the power of a commodity to satisfy the human wants. So the concept of utility was originally given by Jeremy Bentham, but it was formally introduced by Jevons, right? Okay. So coming on to the characteristics of utility. So what are the characteristics or features of utility defined by the Marshallian analysis or the Cardinal analysis? First is that utility is subjective in nature. Subjective based upon the individual's preferences. Every individual gets a different level of utility from the same commodity consumed. It is not uniform throughout the population into consideration. Second is that utility reflects the satisfaction level, right? It reflects the satisfaction level of the of the individual after consuming a particular commodity, right? The third is that utility is based on introspection. So introspection means that how an individual treats a commodity, how an individual values a particular commodity. It differs from one individual to another. Every individual perceives the same very commodity or service differently, right? Like, for example, some might prefer fine dining over street food, and it can be the opposite case in case of some individuals, and so on. So it is based, your concept of utility is based on introspection, that how does one individual perceives a commodity, right? Fourth is that it is measured in relative terms. So relative, that is between commodities, that one, say an individual prefers A over B because A gives him more utility as compared to B. So the utility is measured in relative terms. And lastly, utility is neutral in nature. Neutral, you must have heard that we usually categorize categorize commodities into good or bad. Good commodities give us utility, and the bad commodities give us disutility. So what happens in case of the Marshallian analysis is that a commodity cannot be categorized into two parts. Like there cannot be any kind of categorizations, or there are no binaries in case of classifying the commodities which are present. So all the commodities give the individual some level of utility. Only the values differ across individuals. So these are the 5 characteristics of utility according to the Cardinal or Marshallian analysis. Coming on to the assumptions of the Cardinal school. Firstly, first assumptions, first assumption is that utility is measured in terms of utils. Okay, so they have given one unit in which you can measure utility. Say one good gives me 20 utils of satisfaction and a second unit gives me 30 utils of satisfaction. So you have a common basis of measurement. Okay, so Marshall stated that your marginal utility can be measured in terms of money, saying that how much an individual is willing to pay for a commodity. More he's willing to pay for a particular commodity implies that higher will be the marginal utility, derived from consuming one additional product, and so on. Second assumption is that the consumer is rational in nature, in the sense that the consumer will take rational decision in terms of consumption, in terms of the given budget, and so on. Right. So it means that the assumption that the consumer is rational means that the consumer aims to maximize his utility derived from the consumption of the same commodity, right? Subject to the constraint in income. Third assumption is that money is a measuring mode of utility, right? We measure money using, we measure utility using money. So it implies that the quantity of money a consumer can pay for a unit of commodity. Fourth assumption is that marginal utility of money is constant in nature. So you must note that the concept of marginal utility of money was given by Bernoulli, Daniel Bernoulli. So why did he say that it is important for this assumption to hold true? Like, why is it that marginal utility of money should be kept constant? It is because that if your marginal utility of money changes, right, then it will be impossible to measure utility. So it is mentioned here that if the marginal utility of money changes, it would be impossible to measure utilities. Fifth assumption is that utilities are additive in nature. That is, you can add the utilities which are derived from consuming each unit of a commodity, and we get total utility. Say utility for one good of good A, 1 unit of good A plus utility from second unit of good A, and so on. Okay, and this will derive, or this will give you total utility, right? Next point is that utilities are independent in nature, right? So utility derived from, say, good X is nowhere related to utilities derived from good Y. They are completely independent in nature. And last point is that the utilities are based on introspection, right? So how you, again, I repeat, how you perceive a commodity will decide what the utility you're getting from consuming that particular commodity. So these were the assumptions of cardinal analysis. Now, under cardinal analysis, we have two theories basically. So what are the theories under Marshallian or cardinal analysis? First is the law of DMU, that is diminishing marginal utility, which is also known as your Gauss's first law. Okay, and second is the law of equimarginal utility, also known as Cosen's second law, right? So we'll begin with the law of DMU, that is law of diminishing marginal utility. So what does this law states? It states that as the consumer consumes more and more of a commodity, the marginal utility derived from consuming each additional unit keeps on decreasing. That is, that as and when you increase the consumption, your marginal utility derived from each commodity or each extra commodity consumed will decline. And in this case, like we give, like in the basics of economics, probably in your class 12th or even at graduation levels, we give an example that, okay, a kid consumes one chocolate, gets satisfaction. Second, gets more satisfaction. Third, might be even more. But after the third chocolate, the satisfaction, the fourth gives a lesser satisfaction as compared to third. Fifth gets lesser satisfaction as compared to fourth, and so on. So the marginal utility curve is declining in nature, that as you consume more and more of a commodity, the marginal utility derived from it decreases. So this brings us to some of the few concepts which are very important in understanding the law of DMU. First is the total utility. Now, total utility is the total satisfaction which is achieved after consuming all the units of a commodity, right? So mathematically, it is expressed as summation MUX. So it is the sum of all the marginal utilities which was attained after consuming all the commodities, right? So MU from 1 unit plus MU2 plus MU3 and so on and so forth till MUN will give you total utility, right? So coming on to the concept of marginal utility. So what is marginal utility? So the key word here is that it is the additional or incremental utility which is achieved after consuming additional units of a commodity. So when you consume each additional unit of a commodity, how much utility you get from consuming that additional unit will determine your marginal utility. So it is expressed mathematically, it is expressed as TUN minus TUN minus 1, or it can be further written as a change in TU, right? If there is one, if you're taking as one additional unit. Otherwise, the general formula is change in TU upon change in Q, where Q is the number of units of the commodity, right? So it must be noted that the marginal utility curve is also the slope of the total utility curve. And graphically, they're represented as this. So this is the total utility curve and your marginal utility curve, because this is concave in nature, right? So the marginal utility curve will keep on declining till it reaches maximum, after which it will turn negative. When the TU starts falling, marginal utility becomes negative. So please note the changes, that when TU is increasing at a decreasing rate, right, marginal utility is falling. So there must be, there are few contradictions in this diagram basically, like if we learn the basics of it. So they say that the graphical position of your total utility and marginal utility curve goes like a little this. This states that, okay, till here it is convex, so marginal utility is rising till this point, right? Then marginal utility declines till this point till it reaches 0, and after this point marginal utility becomes negative, right? So the relation goes like when TU is increasing at an increasing rate, right? It is marginal utility is increasing, or in other words, when TU is convex in its shape. When TU is increasing at a decreasing rate, then marginal utility is decreasing. That is, TU is concave, right? And when TU is decreasing, marginal utility becomes negative. So this is how we determine the relationship between total utility and marginal utility. So the point where total utility is maximum, it is called the point of satiation. Okay, so at the point of satiation, I'll just highlight this. At the point of satiation, your marginal utility is equal to 0 and your total utility is at its maximum point. Okay. So now this law, it must be noted that this law operates to achieve maximum satisfaction, assuming that goods are not perfect substitutes to each other. So it assumes that goods are not perfect substitutes. So this is very important. This point is very important. Otherwise, this will violate the conditions of the law, right? Also, it must be noted that the law of DMU also depends on the following factors. First factor being that total wants of a human are unlimited. Unlimited wants, but it is possible to satisfy each single wants. So everything comes under the area of possibility, that the consumer is having unlimited or infinite wants and has high expectations, but he or she can satisfy his wants, right? Second condition is that the goods are not perfect substitutes of each other. Okay, and third is marginal utility of money is constant. So this law operates on these three factors, and this is basically, or more or less, it is the summary of the law, right? But it should also be noted that in this law, tastes and preferences, we haven't yet spoken about the tastes and preferences in this law, but the tastes and preferences are generally taken to be stable. That, okay, it is not possible that the consumer can change his or her wants. So if a consumer prefers A over B, he will always prefer A over B. There will be no such condition or no such scenario when the consumer prefers B over A. This will never happen. Okay. So coming on to the importance or the significance of the law. So what are the significance? So it explains the inverse relationship between demand and price. So the good explains that why there is a there's an inverse or a negative relationship between demand and price. So law of DMU is one of the reasons. So why does it explains the negative relationship? That okay, as you consume more and more of a commodity, right, you will be willing, you won't be as willing to purchase that commodity as you were before, right? So the willingness to purchase the commodity at a given price falls with each successive unit consumed. Therefore, at a higher price, when you've consumed a number of commodities at a higher price, your demand or your willingness to pay will decrease. And hence, there will be a negative relationship between price and demand. Second thing is that it explains the paradox of value. Right. So the marginal utility determines the price of the commodity and not the total utility. Right. So if more of a good is available, there is more availability of a good, right? It will be less desirable. And as a result, there will be a low price. So you must be, there's a paradox that water diamond paradox, right? So it explains that why when water, it is like the most essential thing a human needs, is priced so low as compared to diamonds, because water is easily available. Conditions apply as we are facing the climatic conditions now, severe climatic conditions. I'm just assuming that we are in a perfect world, but water, because it is available in abundance, is priced low as compared to diamonds, right? Okay. Coming on to the next law under the Marshallian analysis, that is the law of equi-marginal utility. Okay, so this law states that marginal utility, which is derived, should be equal to that derived from the last rupee spent. That is that mathematically, if we explain it, that marginal utility divided by price of X should be equal to marginal utility derived from price of Y, and so on till marginal utility by this infinite conditions. So this law definitely assists in consumer equilibrium, in identifying consumer equilibrium. Okay, so in case there's one single good, then marginal utility derived from a good should equal to price. So a person will be like, what he's willing to pay for a commodity depends on the marginal utility of a good, right? So the last rupee spent, the marginal utility should be equal. So that implies, like if we see it mathematically, so this equation, how will this hold true when this is like each successive unit, that marginal utility decreases, right? But with each successive unit, right, so the price should also decrease relatively. Okay. Second is that if we have several goods, then the marginal utility of money will be equal to MUX upon PX is equal to MUY upon PY, and so on. Okay. So what are the criticisms? Coming on to the criticisms of the Cardinal analysis or the Marshallian analysis. First and the foremost criticism is that it is not practical. Okay, so in reality, there's no such consumer which performs such calculations that, okay, this commodity will give me this much util, so I should consume this much. So There is no such consumer which performs such calculations before consuming any commodity, right? Second is that you cannot measure utility, okay? Measure utility, as it is subjective. The very own condition or the very own characteristic of utility violates the assumption that you cannot measure utility because it is subjective in nature, right? Third is, and the most important is, that the marginal utility of money is not constant. It cannot remain constant. As in when you gain money, the marginal utility of money derived from it decreases, right? A value of a rupee 100 notes, 100 note, rupees 100 note will be of much more value to a poor person as compared to a billionaire. So you cannot assume that the marginal utility of money is constant, right? Fourth is that Marshall ignored the income effect, right? So what if, like, what happens when income increases? When income increases, your marginal utility of money decreases definitely, right? And other way around, when what happens when the price of good decreases? That will increase your real income. So again, you'll be consuming less units. So less units, and as a result, Marshall did not include income effect into his theory of demand, right? And fifth is that he was unable to explain the Giffen goods paradox. Giffen goods paradox. He's always talked about that the law of demand explains the inverse relationship between price and demand. But what in the case of Giffen goods, where there's a positive relationship between price and demand? So all these criticisms were taken into account in ordinal or Hicksian analysis, which we'll cover in our next lecture, right? So hope you liked it, and thank you so much.